let's turn to the Center Square's Esther Wickham for a story about how much one particular California school is spending, not necessarily on students, but on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Esther, thanks for taking time with us. As always, how much are taxpayers paying for DEI at just one California school?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So, Defending Education just came out with these documents, contracts between Merced City School District and various DEI initiatives and programs, and discovered that there's over $900,000 that the school district has paid out to these consultants on DEI initiatives and programs for students around the school district. And we're seeing here, the contracts include African American affinity groups for 100 African American students and a summer rap camp. And this, all facilitates over taxpayer dollars, $900,000. So we're getting close to $1 million here just for these DEI initiative programs.
Fascinating when you look at how that money's being used for consultants and so on. But let's take a look at some of the other stats from this school district, Esther, that you were able to get out in your reporting. Just how many students are there? How many students to teachers are there? And then you look at the outcomes of their education. And I mean, is this almost $1 million helping them get better outcomes?
Yeah, when you look at, how much how much the school is spending versus how the students are doing, the school district, has over 11,000 students, and the teacher ratio is 25 students to 1. And so that's not a ton. I'm sure the teachers are extremely exhausted, and in general the country is seeing a national teacher shortage, so that's something to be concerned about. But also, according to Niche, which is kind of a school ranking grade reporting website and organization, they looked at how this specific school district is doing, and we see that 20% of students in the school district are proficient in math and only 33% in reading. And their overall grade, because this reporting organization looks at the school districts versus on grades, and they get an overall C grade. Specifically, academics and teachers have a C grade, and I think diversity got a B, but their overall grade is a C. And so the taxpayers just have to wonder, how are these students excelling in academics? They're in the education system. That's the goal. But then we're over here seeing and uncovering these documents and contracts that their taxpayer dollars are going towards these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but their students aren't necessarily excelling in academics.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of concern about education and the tax dollars that are used to fund these schools. And in some areas across the country, it seems they're spending a lot on students with not really that great of outcomes, where some other areas are spending less and getting much better outcomes. Makes you wonder if the curriculum is to blame and who's deciding on that curriculum. And I guess one way you can look at that is how much money is being spent on something like DEI programs. Now, Esther, one of the things we were talking about before we jumped on here with the Center Square Daily was part of this program included a rap song. I don't know this group. Tell us a little bit about this song, the lyrics there were, and maybe what some of that tells you.
Yeah, so like I said before, part of the contract goes to this rap camp, and there's videos on YouTube. The company has the various videos facilitating their and marketing the thing that they are selling to these schools. But specifically, the signature program is titled "More Than a Month," and their song lyrics model after hip hop groups, just to kind of engage the students. Nowadays, students have very low attention spans, and so they're trying to mix hip hop and interesting entertainment and media with education. But as we see with some of the lyrics that I quote in the story, one of the lyrics says, "This track's for you, every teacher and parent. You need this truth. Our history books have a white male skew, but believe me, I ain't blaming you." And so it kind of has this angle, this perspective that everything that the teachers are teaching, whether it comes to American history or education, it's going to have a white male skew. And this is a perspective. This is an opinion. If there is a more conservative family or teachers or students, they might not necessarily agree with that. And so it's interesting to see that these artists are coming in and trying to educate their kids and kind of stating it as a fact, as truth, even though this is a very controversial subject, and whether diversity, equity, and inclusion has a good message or has a good purpose. Is it trying to push a specific ideology onto the kids, or are they actually striving to educate the students? As I said before, Defending Education did this investigation, and talking to Erica Sanzi, who's the senior director of communications, they're saying that this spending of almost $1 million on these programs are based on identity and activism, and that's indefensible. And in this case, she says that these specific affinity groups should be illegal, right? Because they're not necessarily focused on educating kids, as she believes, are facts and truth, but just an ideology or an opinion and that kind of skew.
Well, and you got to think, yeah, sure, there can be groups, and there's the chess club, there's the, theater club, there's jazz band, and those are based off interests, not based off somebody's DNA or, color of their skin, right? And I think that's where a lot of the people who oppose these types of initiatives say, all of this seems to want to put people into a certain category just based off the color of their skin, not off the content of their character. And again, I think it's an ongoing conversation that, Esther, obviously the Trump administration has been very opposed to DEI programs. How does this work into that equation, especially with the threats of withholding federal tax dollars?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, literally 5 days into President Trump's second term, he signed an executive order, wanting to remove and eradicate, as he says, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because from his perspective and the administration's perspective, they believe that these kinds of initiatives and these kinds of programs are discriminatory and are wasteful. And so he wants to focus on merit-based practices. And so just like you said, you want to focus on the content of their character. And are these students actually excelling in academics? Are they achieving what they want to achieve when it comes to their careers and future endeavors? And so I think when it comes to that argument, I think both sides of the coin believe that. They want to protect students. They want to push students towards the best success that they can do, but the way that they achieve that is a little bit different. When Merced City School District was able to comment on this, they didn't necessarily respond to the Center Square, but they have made statements in the past, and they said they are proud to support, this partnership and these groups coming to their school because they believe, quote, it's a unique approach to education, engaging students in music and media and much more to kind of accept and understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Now, I know a lot of states, especially states that might have a Democrat lean to it, are looking at budgets and how their K through 12 systems are going to be impacted by the possible withholding of federal tax dollars if they include DEI type of programs in their education curriculum, even after school programs that get federal tax dollars. Some of that could possibly be scrutinized further. So this obviously is going to be an ongoing thing we'll watch, Esther, and it's good we've got you for the Center Square to keep an eye on that. One other story that deals with DEI in particular, and you can find this headline at the Center Square: National Medical School Accreditor dropping remaining DEI requirements. How do you think that fits into this ongoing conversation of the Trump administration's insistence that education strip DEI out of its curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, we're going to start to see around the country people either complying or rejecting, and we're just going to continue to see the lawsuits pile up. And specifically with this medical school, again, we have the two differing perspectives with that threat of withholding federal funding. The Trump administration has used that strategy time and time again. Some universities and some school districts have bent for that fear of losing federal funding, and some have stood their ground. But in this case, with a medical school, they did follow through for fear of accreditation standards. And what we're seeing on both sides is one is saying, yes, we shouldn't prioritize ideological training. We should be looking at, clinical preparation. Are these students prepared to enter the workforce, not based on what they look like, but how they act? What are they actually doing in the classroom and in the work environment? And, are they using critical thinking and professional development? And that's, that perspective of we want our students to excel, but we don't want it based on, their skin color or their gender. And then we have on the flip side, those opposed to this decision for lowering or removing the DEI initiatives. We have the Economic Policy Institute saying that without protected and equitable pathways for students of color, we risk returning to higher education systems defined by exclusion rather than opportunity. And so, again, both perspectives have that goal of wanting students to excel, wanting them to be successful in the workforce and within education and actually learning. But we see that kind of conclusion. Are we actually going to eradicate diversity? And, students of color, are they going to have those opportunities if we remove DEI? Or, on the other side, if we take away diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can actually focus on the student itself, him or herself, and are we actually seeing them excel for the things they're doing, not just the way that they look or their background. And so it's definitely going to be an ongoing conversation, and we're going to see probably a lot of issues pop up here and there depending on the state and the school district. But it's interesting to continue to watch, how much school districts are actually paying and how that's impacting the taxpayer as a whole.
And again, especially as these school districts have the local taxpayers, and they also get money from the state and the federal government, and how all this plays into the bottom line. Clearly, during an election year, I think DEI is going to continue to be one of those hot button issues. Esther Wickham, Center Square reporter for education. Greatly appreciate your time, as always, here for the Center Square.